I signed the papers on a Tuesday morning. My attorney slid them across the table. My wife picked up the pen, and I watched her sign away the last 6 years of our marriage with the same casual confidence she used to order coffee. She didn't even look at me. When we walked out of that office, she smiled. Not at me, just at the air in front of her, like she was already somewhere else in her mind. Somewhere better, somewhere she felt she deserved to be. I smiled too, but for a very different reason. My name is Callum. I'm a materials engineer from Nashville, Tennessee, and this is the story of how I almost lost everything, and why I'm grateful I didn't fight back sooner. I met my wife, Bridget, at a friend's birthday party in 2017. She was sharp, funny, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and immediately make everyone feel like the conversation had been missing something until she arrived. I was 31. She was 28. We dated for 8 months before I proposed. Her father, a quiet man named Earl who built fences for a living, pulled me aside at our engagement party and said, "Son, you're the most level-headed person she's ever brought home. Don't let her talk you out of being yourself." I thought it was just a father being protective. I understand now what he was really warning me about. The first 3 years of our marriage were fine. Not perfect, but fine. I was working as a senior engineer at a materials firm in Nashville, pulling in good money, and on the side, I was developing something I'd been obsessing over since graduate school. A structural adhesive compound that could bond industrial-grade materials at a fraction of the cost of existing solutions. I won't get too deep into the technical details, but the short version is, if it worked the way I believed it would, construction companies would save millions on large-scale projects. I'd been testing formulas in a small workshop I rented on the edge of town, spending weekends and late nights running trials. Bridget knew about it. She just didn't think much of it. "You've been working on this adhesive thing for what, 4 years now?" she said one evening, not looking up from her phone. We were sitting in the kitchen, me at the table with my research notes, her on the counter scrolling through something that seemed far more interesting than anything I had to say. "5 actually," I said, "and you still haven't sold it. It's not ready yet." She set her phone down and looked at me with an expression I'd come to recognize, patient on the surface, dismissive underneath. "Cal, at some point you have to ask yourself whether you're investing in a future or avoiding one." I didn't argue. I went back to my notes. That became the pattern. I'd work, she'd comment. I'd absorb it and keep going. I don't think she was a cruel person, not at her core. I think she genuinely believed she was being realistic. The problem was that her version of realistic looked a lot like giving up on anything that hadn't already proven itself. Around year 4, something shifted. Bridget got promoted to regional sales director at her company, which put her in regular contact with her boss, a man named, and I'll use his real name because it's not like he cares, Whitfield. Philip Whitfield, 47, divorced, drove a black Range Rover, wore the kind of watch that cost more than most people's cars. He was the type of man who talked about investment philosophy at dinner parties and made sure everyone in the room knew he'd been to Barcelona recently. I met him twice. Both times he shook my hand like he was doing me a favor. I noticed Bridget started coming home later, started mentioning Whitfield more, started having opinions about restaurants she'd never heard of before, travel destinations that suddenly seemed urgent to visit, a general dissatisfaction with the life we'd built that she'd never quite articulated before, but now seemed to have a very clear vocabulary for. "We never do anything exciting," she told me one Sunday morning. "We went to Chattanooga last month," I said. "That's not what I mean." "What do you mean?" She stirred her coffee and looked out the window. "I mean, I feel like we're just treading water, Cal. You're always in that workshop. We don't go anywhere. We don't have anything to show for where we are in life." "We have a house," I said. "We have savings. We're not hurting." That's not the same as thriving. I asked her what thriving looked like. She didn't have a clean answer, but over the next few months, I started to see it take shape. Thriving, apparently, looked like Whitfield's life. The dinners he expensed, the weekend trips his team took, the ease with which he moved through the world like money was a language he'd been born speaking. I kept working. By early the following year, I was closer than I'd ever been to a viable formula. I had a prototype compound that had passed internal testing, and I'd quietly reached out to an intellectual property attorney to understand what a patent application would look like. The attorney introduced me to a licensing consultant who worked with manufacturing firms. One conversation led to another, and by spring, I was in early discussions with a regional construction conglomerate that had been looking for exactly what I'd built. I told no one. Not my friends. Not my parents. Not my parents. Not Bridget. partly because I'd learned not to raise expectations until there was something concrete to raise them with, partly because, by that point, Bridget and I had stopped talking about my work in any meaningful way. It had become one of those topics that lived in the corner of the room, always present, never acknowledged. And partly because something in my gut told me to wait. The morning I found out was a Thursday in April. I'd driven out to meet the licensing consultant, a methodical woman named Harriet, who had spent 15 years brokering deals between engineers and manufacturers and had the kind of calm that comes from having seen every possible outcome. She slid a preliminary offer across the table. I read the number. Read it again. I drove home in silence. Pulled into the driveway. Sat in the car for about 10 minutes staring at the steering wheel. $48 million. That was the opening offer. For a non-exclusive licensing arrangement, meaning I retained ownership of the patent. When I walked inside, Bridget was getting ready to go out. She was dressed up, nicer than usual. She said she had a work dinner. She didn't ask how my day was. I made myself a sandwich and watched the evening news and didn't say a word. 3 weeks later, she sat me down and told me she was in love with Whitfield, that she was sorry, but she'd felt something was missing in our marriage for a long time, and she didn't want to keep living inauthentically. She used that word, inauthentically. I wondered briefly if Whitfield had used it first. She says she thought we should separate. She says she hoped I understood that this wasn't about anything I'd done wrong. It was just about what she needed. Then she said something I haven't forgotten. I care about you, Cal, but I need a life that matches who I actually am. I asked her what that meant. She hesitated, then said, I need someone who's already arrived, not someone still trying to figure out if they ever will. I nodded slowly. I told her I understood. I told her I wasn't going to fight her on it. That night, after she went to stay at her sister's place, I called Harriet and told her I was ready to move forward with the deal, but that I needed it finalized before my divorce proceedings were complete. She said she'd already anticipated that possibility and had been structuring the timeline accordingly. Are you sure about this? She asked. I've never been more sure of anything, I said. When Bridget's attorney sent over the initial divorce settlement proposal, it was aggressive. She wanted the house. She wanted the car. She wanted a portion of any future business income, which her attorney argued should include any revenue from my hobby projects. That phrase, hobby projects, I recognized immediately. She'd used it before, probably not realizing her attorney would put it in a legal document. I met with my own attorney, a steady man named Leonard, who had handled enough divorces to have developed a permanent low-grade skepticism about human nature. He laid out 2 options. Option 1, we contest everything. It would take 8 to 14 months. Both sides would spend significant money. There would be depositions and hearings, and a lot of Bridget's attorney asking questions about my finances and business activities. Option 2, we give her what she's asking for. The house, the car, $200,000 in cash, and we settle cleanly and quickly. Leonard looked at me over his reading glasses. Option 2 only makes sense, he said. If there's something worth protecting that she doesn't know about yet. I told him about the deal. He set his pen down. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and this was finalized before she filed? Signed and notarized 11 days before she filed, I said. He picked the pen back up. Then option 2, he said. Absolutely option 2. What Bridget and her attorney didn't understand, and what Leonard explained with the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing something other people don't, was that the licensing deal had been structured and executed before our separation was legally filed. Under Tennessee law, assets acquired or contractually secured prior to separation are generally treated as separate property, particularly when the receiving party can demonstrate the income originated from premarital intellectual work. My patent, my formula, my 5 years of weekends in a rented workshop while she was on her phone. The deal was mine, all of it. The settlement she'd agreed to, the house, the car, the $200,000 was, from where I was standing, a very reasonable price to pay for a clean exit and the full protection of $48 million. Her attorney figured it out eventually. About 2 months after the settlement was signed, Bridget called me. The deal had been reported in a regional business journal. Callum Webb signs landmark licensing deal for proprietary adhesive compound. They put a photo of me shaking Harriet's hand. The call came in at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning. You knew, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. Silence. You let me take the house. You wanted the house, I said. I was trying to respect that. She hung up. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from her attorney claiming that because the deal involved technology developed during our marriage, she was entitled to a portion of the proceeds. The argument was thin, and Leonard knew it. He filed a response that was so thorough it essentially made her attorney's case look like something assembled the night before. The judge reviewed the timeline, reviewed the patent application history, reviewed the pre-separation agreement dates, and dismissed the claim. I heard from mutual friends that Bridget was furious. That Whitfield, who had apparently been quite charming about the whole affair while she was just an ambitious sales director, became considerably less so once she was an estranged wife with a legal battle in a house she suddenly couldn't afford the upkeep on. He didn't leave immediately, but he didn't stay long either. About 4 months after the settlement, I drove past our old house on my way to a meeting downtown. There was a U-Haul in the driveway. Not Bridget's car, a different one. A neighbor I'd always liked, a retired postal worker named Hector who had no filter whatsoever, was out watering his roses. He caught my eye and shook his head slowly. "She's been subletting rooms," he called out to me. "This week some fella named Phil moved into the upstairs bedroom, sells insurance or something." He paused. "Thought she was upgrading." I thanked him and kept driving. I'm not going to pretend I felt nothing. That would be dishonest, and I've had enough of dishonesty to last me the rest of my life. There was a period, somewhere around month 2 of the divorce, where I sat with the full weight of it. 6 years. Not all of it was bad. Some of it was genuinely good, or at least felt that way. We had a dog named Biscuit that we'd adopted from a shelter in 2019, and who slept at the foot of our bed every night without exception. I took Biscuit in the settlement. He was the one thing I actually negotiated for. He's asleep next to my desk right now. He still does the same thing. Curls up on whatever surface is closest to wherever I am. Here's what I've come to understand. Bridget wasn't wrong that I was still building towards something. She was wrong about what that meant. She interpreted uncertainty as evidence of failure, and she made her decisions based on that interpretation. By the time she discovered she'd been wrong, the decision had already been made, and no amount of legal maneuvering could undo the math. I don't think about Whitfield much. He was a detail, a variable in a situation that was already fracturing along its own lines. I think about Earl, her father, sometimes. He called me about 3 months after the settlement finalized. He's a man of very few words. He said, "I heard what happened. I'm sorry about Bridget, and I'm glad you landed on your feet." Then he asked how Biscuit was doing. That meant more to me than he probably knew. The company I started after the licensing deal, a small materials R&D firm, has 7 full-time employees now. We're working on 2 new compounds. Harriet is on our advisory board. Leonard sends a Christmas card every year. I bought a piece of land about 40 minutes outside Nashville. Not a ranch, exactly. More of a property with enough space to matter. There's a workshop out back that's 3 times the size of the one I used to rent. Some evenings after everyone's gone home and the light is starting to go orange over the tree line, I take my coffee out there and stand in the doorway and just exist in it for a minute. The compound tests. The work. The quiet. Biscuit usually follows me out and sits by my feet. There's a woman I've been seeing for the past 8 months. Thoughtful. Works in architecture. Laughs at the right things and doesn't flinch at the wrong ones. We're not in a rush. Neither of us is. We both know what it looks like when someone mistakes motion for direction. I'm not telling this story to be bitter. Bitterness requires you to keep looking backward, and I've got too much in front of me to spend much energy doing that. I'm telling it because someone out there is sitting in a workshop or a basement or a corner office at 11 o'clock at night working on something they believe in, while someone in the next room has already decided it doesn't count. And I want them to know, keep building, keep your records clean and your timelines documented. Do the work with or without the applause. Bridget once asked me how long I'd been saying my breakthrough was coming. The honest answer is, I never said it was coming. I just kept working until it did. I thought a lot about what actually happened in those 6 years. Not the legal part. That part is just paperwork and timelines and a judge who read the dates correctly. I mean the human part. The part where 2 people share a roof and slowly stop sharing anything else. Bridget wasn't a villain. I want to be clear about that. She made choices, real ones, with real consequences, and some of those choices were selfish and some were unkind. But she wasn't sitting in a corner somewhere plotting against me. She just stopped believing. And when a person stops believing in what you're building, they don't usually announce it. They get quiet in a specific way. They start looking elsewhere. They find someone who already has what they think they want, and they mistake proximity to that person for a shortcut to the life they imagined. The thing about shortcuts is they rarely account for what you leave behind to take them. I spent 5 years in a rented workshop while she was in the next room, convinced I was wasting both our time. And I understand, honestly, why it looked that way. I had nothing to show for it except notebooks and failed tests and a certainty that lived entirely inside my own head. Certainty without proof looks exactly like delusion from the outside. I get that. But here's what I've come to understand about that period. The work required me to stay quiet, not because I was hiding something malicious, because building something real takes a long time, and every time you explain it before it's done, you bleed a little energy into defending it instead of finishing it. I learned that early. Keep your head down. Let the results speak. The results spoke. What troubles me, looking back, isn't that Bridget left. It's that she left based on a judgment she made before the evidence was in. She looked at the middle of a process and called it the ending. That's a failure of patience, yes. But more than that, it's a failure of intellectual honesty, the unwillingness to hold uncertainty without filling it in with a conclusion that's easier to live with. And Whitfield, I genuinely don't think much about him. He was a man who had already arrived somewhere and was good at making others feel the distance between where they stood and where he stood. That's a certain kind of charisma. It's also a certain kind of manipulation, even when it's not intentional. Bridget confused his arrival for stability. What she found, eventually, was that a man who's already arrived doesn't rearrange his life for someone new. He makes room, briefly, and then closes it back up. What I keep coming back to is this. The life I have now was not handed to me. It was the result of thousands of quiet decisions to keep going when there was no audience, no applause, and no guarantee. That kind of persistence isn't dramatic. Nobody films it. But it accumulates, day after day, into something real. I think about Earl sometimes. Her father, the fence builder, he knew something about his daughter that I didn't fully understand yet when he gave me that warning at our engagement party. He also knew something about me. He saw that I was the kind of person who stays the course. He was right. Biscuit is still asleep by my feet. The workshop out back has lights on most evenings. I'm not finished building.